The middle class used to come with a promise. Not a guarantee of wealth, not a life of luxury, just a reasonable expectation that if you worked hard, earned a decent income, and avoided obvious financial mistakes, life would feel stable. You could buy a home without sacrificing every other goal. You could own a reliable car, take a vacation once in a while, save for retirement, and still have enough breathing room left over to handle life's surprises. For decades, that was the deal. It wasn't always easy, but it felt achievable. Today, more and more people are discovering that the deal has changed. What's strange is that this realization often arrives slowly. Most people don't wake up one morning and suddenly think the middle class doesn't work the way it used to. Instead, they notice smaller things. Their grocery bill keeps climbing, insurance premiums increase again, rent or mortgage payments take up a larger percentage of income than expected, vacations require months of planning, emergency expenses feel more stressful than they should, and eventually a question starts forming in the back of their mind. If I'm making more money than I used to, why does everything feel tighter? That's the contradiction millions of Americans are struggling with right now. Wages have risen over the years, but so have many of the expenses that define middle-class life. In some categories, costs have risen dramatically faster than incomes. The result is a financial reality that feels confusing because people are still measuring affordability using standards from a completely different economy. The problem isn't necessarily that people are irresponsible. In fact, many households feeling squeezed are doing exactly what they were told to do. They're working, earning, raising families, buying homes, saving what they can, and trying to build a stable future. The challenge is that many of the purchases and lifestyles that once felt comfortably middle class have wildly become far more expensive than most people realize. And because the shift happened gradually, expectations didn't change nearly as fast as the math did. So that's why this conversation matters. A lot of Americans are still spending money on things that feel normal simply because they've always felt normal. But feeling normal and being affordable are no longer the same thing. What used to be ordinary has increasingly become expensive by default, and in some cases, financially dangerous. Today, we're looking at 12 things middle-class Americans secretly can't afford anymore, even though millions of people continue paying for them every single day. Some of these will be obvious, others may be uncomfortable, but together they reveal a bigger story about what has happened to affordability in modern America. Let's start with one of the most emotional purchases people make. Number 1. Buying a house in expensive markets. Home ownership has always occupied a special place in the American imagination. For generations, owning a home represented stability, success, and progress. It was the milestone that signaled you had officially made it into adulthood. You worked, saved, qualified for a mortgage, and gradually built wealth through equity, while creating a stable environment for your family. The problem is that the numbers supporting that dream have changed dramatically in many parts of the country. Home prices surged, mortgage rates climbed, property taxes increased, insurance costs exploded in certain states, maintenance costs rose alongside labor and material prices. What was once a manageable financial goal increasingly became a massive, long-term commitment that requires far more income than previous generations needed. The difficult part is that many people still evaluate housing using outdated assumptions. They remember what homes cost 10 years ago. They remember what their parents paid. They remember a time when a middle-class salary could comfortably support a mortgage while leaving room for savings, vacations, and future goals. Today's reality often looks very different. In many metropolitan areas, households earning what would objectively be considered strong incomes still struggle to purchase homes without stretching themselves financially. And that's where one of the most dangerous misconceptions enters the picture. People confuse mortgage approval with affordability. A bank can approve you for a loan based on formulas. Your actual life operates according to reality. Reality includes job uncertainty, healthcare costs, childcare expenses, inflation, emergencies, repairs, and all the unpredictable events that never show up neatly inside a lending calculation. Once you add insurance, taxes, maintenance, utilities, furnishing costs, and ongoing repairs, the true cost of ownership becomes much larger than the mortgage payment people focus on initially. This creates a situation where many households appear successful from the outside while quietly feeling trapped on the inside. The house becomes the center of every financial decision. Retirement contributions get reduced. Emergency funds stop growing. Vacations become harder to justify. Every unexpected expense creates stress because so much income is already committed. What's fascinating is that people often tolerate this pressure because home ownership still feels emotionally correct. Renting may offer more flexibility, but buying still carries social and psychological status. It feels like the responsible choice, the mature choice, the successful choice. As a result, many households continue pursuing home ownership even when the numbers are sending warning signals. None of this means buying a home is automatically a bad decision. For many families, it can still be a wonderful long-term move. The issue is that affordability has changed dramatically, especially in expensive markets. What once felt like a straightforward middle-class milestone increasingly behaves like a luxury purchase that requires significant financial sacrifice. And for a growing number of Americans, the dream of home ownership isn't disappearing because they lack ambition, it's disappearing because the math no longer works the way it used to. Number 2. Brand new cars. Few purchases have become normalized more successfully than the new car. For decades, replacing your vehicle every few years felt like a natural part of financial progress. You got a raise, changed jobs, started a family, or reached an important milestone, and upgrading your car felt like a reasonable reward for your hard work. The challenge is that vehicle prices have changed dramatically, while many people continue approaching car ownership with the same mindset they used years ago. New vehicles now routinely cost amounts that would have shocked buyers a generation ago. Monthly payments climbed, insurance costs increased, interest rates rose, repairs became more expensive, even basic ownership costs expanded. Yet, despite all of this, consumers continue upgrading at remarkably similar rates because the purchase is usually framed around monthly affordability rather than total cost. That distinction matters more than most people realize. When people evaluate a car based on monthly payments, the conversation shifts away from the actual price. Instead of asking whether a vehicle is worth $50,000, they ask whether they can manage $800 per month. The total cost fades into the background, while the monthly obligation becomes the primary focus. This creates a psychological blind spot that car manufacturers and lenders understand extremely well. A new car rarely feels like a luxury purchase because it's associated with practical benefits. Transportation is necessary, safety matters, reliability matters, families need space. All of those arguments contain truth, but they can also make people far more comfortable accepting expenses that would otherwise feel excessive. Meanwhile, depreciation continues doing what depreciation has always done. The moment a new vehicle leaves the dealership, value begins disappearing. Thousands of dollars can vanish within a surprisingly short period of time, yet the monthly payment remains exactly the same. What makes this particularly challenging for middle-class households is that transportation gradually transforms into a long-term financial obligation. Income that could have been invested, saved, or used to create flexibility becomes permanently allocated toward maintaining a depreciating asset. And the irony is that many genuinely affluent households don't play this game at all. Research consistently finds that many affluent households drive reliable vehicles for far longer than people expect, not because they can't afford something newer, but because they understand opportunity cost. They recognize that financial freedom is often more valuable than constantly upgrading things that already work perfectly well. The middle class hasn't stopped buying transportation. Increasingly, it has started financing status, convenience, and expectations through transportation. And in an era of rising costs, that distinction becomes incredibly expensive. Number 3. Weekly restaurant culture. One of the most interesting changes in middle-class spending isn't a major purchase at all. It's a habit, a routine, something that feels so normal most people never stop to calculate what it's actually costing them over the course of a year. A coffee on the way to work, lunch during a busy day, dinner on Friday night because everyone is tired, brunch over the weekend, food delivery after a long day. None of these decisions feel financially significant in isolation, which is exactly why restaurant spending has become such a powerful drain on household budgets. A decade ago, eating out regularly could still fit comfortably inside many middle-class budgets. Today, the math looks very different. Restaurant prices climbed significantly, tipping expectations increased, service charges became common, and even casual dining experiences now carry price tags that would have felt excessive not very long ago. What's fascinating is how quickly people adapt to these changes. A meal that once felt expensive eventually starts feeling normal. The higher price gets absorbed into everyday life. The behavior continues even though the financial impact becomes larger every year. This is where psychology starts mattering more than arithmetic. Most people don't justify restaurant spending by saying they want to waste money. They justify it emotionally. They work hard, they're busy, they want convenience, they want experiences with friends and family, they want a small reward after stressful days. All of those reasons are completely understandable. The problem isn't the occasional restaurant meal. The problem is turning expensive habits into automatic habits. Because automatic spending becomes invisible spending. When something becomes part of a routine, people stop evaluating whether it's still worth the cost. They stop asking whether the experience is providing enough value to justify the expense. The purchase shifts from a conscious choice to a default behavior. And over time, defaults become surprisingly expensive. Imagine two households earning exactly the same income. One spends several $100s each month on restaurant meals and food delivery simply because it's become part of their lifestyle. The other enjoys restaurants too, but does so intentionally and invests the difference. The gap between those households may not look dramatic after 1 month or even 1 year, but over 10 or 20 years, the difference becomes substantial. That's the hidden danger of lifestyle spending. It rarely hurts you immediately. It quietly changes your long-term trajectory. The bigger issue is that many restaurant experiences aren't actually improving at the same pace prices are increasing. People are often paying significantly more for experiences that feel roughly the same, or in some cases, worse, than they did a few years ago. Yet, because dining out remains deeply embedded in modern culture, many households continue spending as though affordability hasn't changed. And that's really the theme of this entire conversation. The experience may still be enjoyable, the habit may still feel normal, but the math underneath it has fundamentally changed. Number 4. Big family vacations. Few expenses create more emotional conflict than vacations. Because vacations aren't really about travel, they're about memories. People don't book flights because they love airports. They don't reserve hotels because they enjoy checking into hotels. They spend money because they want experiences with the people they care about. They want stories, memories, photos, time together. That's what makes this category so difficult to discuss honestly. For many middle-class families, vacations have become dramatically more expensive than they used to be. Flights cost more, hotels cost more, rental cars cost more, attractions cost more, food costs more. Nearly every component of travel became more expensive at the same time. What once felt like a manageable family expense can now require thousands upon thousands of dollars. And yet, families continue booking these trips because the emotional value feels impossible to measure. Parents want their children to have memorable experiences. Couples want time together. Families want moments they'll remember years later. Those desires are completely reasonable. The problem emerges when people begin financing experiences that their financial reality cannot comfortably support. This is where social comparison quietly enters the equation. Modern families aren't just evaluating vacations based on what they want, they're evaluating them against what they see online. Social media created a world where extraordinary experiences appear normal. Theme park trips, luxury resorts, international travel, endless photographs of families creating picture-perfect memories. Over time, these experiences stop feeling exceptional and start feeling expected. And expectations are expensive. The danger isn't taking vacations. The danger is feeling obligated to maintain experiences that no longer fit comfortably within your financial situation. That's when credit cards become part of the plan. That's when payment plans start appearing. That's when families begin borrowing from their future in order to preserve a lifestyle that looks normal from the outside. The difficult question very few people ask is whether the financial stress that follows the vacation outweighs the enjoyment that came from it. If a one-week trip creates 6 months of anxiety afterward, was the experience truly affordable? That's not a question many people enjoy thinking about, but it's becoming increasingly relevant. Because middle-class affordability once included regular vacations without major financial consequences. Today, many families are discovering that what used to feel normal now requires far greater sacrifice than they expected. The vacation ends. The memories remain, but so does the bill. Number 5. Living alone in expensive cities. For a long time, living alone represented independence. It was a sign that you were building your own life, managing your own responsibilities, and creating your own space in the world. For many people, especially younger professionals, having an apartment entirely to yourself felt like a natural milestone of adulthood. The problem is that housing economics changed far faster than cultural expectations. In many cities, rents have increased to levels that consume enormous portions of take-home income. Add utilities, insurance, transportation, groceries, and other basic living expenses, and suddenly a salary that appears healthy on paper starts feeling surprisingly fragile in practice. What's interesting is that many people continue pursuing solo living arrangements because the alternative feels emotionally uncomfortable. Roommates may save money, but they can feel like a step backward. Moving in with family may be financially smart, but it often feels like a loss of independence. Downsizing may improve finances, but it can feel like personal failure. Those emotions matter because financial decisions are rarely driven by numbers alone. People want privacy. They want control over their environment. They want the sense of accomplishment that comes from maintaining their own space. These are legitimate desires, but legitimate desires can still become financially expensive when economic conditions change. The challenge is that many individuals are spending such large percentages of income on housing that other financial goals become difficult to achieve. Saving slows down, investing becomes inconsistent, emergency funds remain smaller than they should be, future plans get delayed. Technically, the bills get paid, but financial progress becomes much harder. That's why affordability isn't simply about whether you can survive a payment. It's about whether you can build a future while making that payment. A growing number of people can afford to live alone in the sense that they can continue paying rent every month. What they can't comfortably afford is the opportunity cost that comes with dedicating such a large portion of their income to housing. And that's a very different conversation. Number 6. Subscription life. Perhaps no spending category better represents modern consumer culture than subscriptions. The reason subscriptions became so powerful is simple. They don't feel expensive. $10 here, $15 there, another streaming service, another membership, another app, another recurring charge quietly added to the list. Individually, each subscription appears harmless. Most people can easily justify a monthly charge that costs less than a dinner out. The problem emerges when dozens of these charges begin accumulating over time. Entertainment subscriptions, music services, cloud storage, fitness apps, shopping memberships, software tools, news platforms, premium features, family plans. Before long, many households are spending hundreds of dollars every month on services they barely think about anymore. That's what makes subscription spending so different from traditional purchases. Traditional purchases create friction. You walk into a store, see a price, and consciously decide whether something is worth buying. Subscriptions remove that moment entirely. The decision happens once, while the payment continues indefinitely. Companies understand this dynamic extremely well. The less frequently consumers reevaluate a purchase, the more likely they are to keep paying for it. Over time, subscriptions become background noise. They disappear from conscious awareness while continuing to remove money from your account every month. Many people couldn't list every recurring charge they're currently paying for without checking their bank statements. And that's exactly why the model works so well. The bigger issue is that subscription spending often survives long after the value disappears. People continue paying because canceling feels inconvenient, because they might use the service later, or simply because they've forgotten it exists. This creates a fascinating contradiction. Many households carefully compare prices when making large purchases, yet they rarely audit the recurring expenses quietly draining thousands of dollars every year. The middle class didn't suddenly become irresponsible. It simply entered an economy where spending became increasingly invisible, and invisible spending is often the most dangerous kind. Number 7. Premium grocery lifestyles. Most people think of groceries as a responsible expense, which is exactly why this category has become so interesting financially. Unlike vacations, luxury cars, or expensive gadgets, grocery shopping rarely feels indulgent. People don't leave the store feeling like they splurged. They leave feeling like they handled a basic adult responsibility. But somewhere over the last decade, grocery spending changed. Food inflation obviously played a role. Prices increased across countless categories, and households felt the impact immediately. Yet inflation is only part of the story. The more interesting shift happened in the way food is marketed and consumed. Modern grocery stores don't simply sell food anymore. They sell identity. Walk through many supermarkets today, and you'll see products marketed around optimization, wellness, performance, longevity, convenience, sustainability, or lifestyle aspirations. Consumers aren't just buying snacks, they're buying healthier versions of themselves. They're buying efficiency. They're buying self-improvement. And while there's nothing wrong with prioritizing health, that mindset can quietly create spending habits that are difficult to notice. A household might spend extra on premium products because each individual upgrade feels reasonable. A slightly better brand here, organic options there, prepared meals for convenience, specialty products that promise better nutrition or improved performance. None of these decisions seem dramatic on their own. The challenge is that dozens of small upgrades eventually produce a very large number at the bottom of the receipt. That's where many middle-class households get caught. The spending doesn't feel excessive because every purchase comes wrapped in a responsible justification. Health matters, nutrition matters, quality matters, convenience matters. All of that is true, but the financial question remains exactly the same. Is the additional value worth the additional cost? Many people never stop to ask. Instead, premium spending gradually becomes normal spending. Over time, grocery budgets expand far beyond what people originally intended, and because the spending is associated with positive goals, it rarely receives the same scrutiny as other categories. Someone might carefully compare vehicle prices for weeks while barely noticing that their grocery spending has doubled over several years. The irony is that some of the most financially successful households are remarkably intentional about food spending. They prioritize quality where it matters, but they don't automatically assume that higher prices create proportionally better outcomes. Because ultimately, groceries should support your life. They shouldn't quietly become another lifestyle category where aspiration consistently outruns affordability. Number 8. Upgrading phones every cycle. Few products demonstrate modern consumer psychology better than smartphones. If you compare today's phones to the phones people carried 15 years ago, the improvements are extraordinary. Modern devices are faster, more capable, and more powerful than anyone could have imagined. But if you compare today's newest phone to last year's phone, the differences often become much smaller. And yet, upgrade behavior remains remarkably consistent. Every year, consumers are presented with new models, new features, and new reasons to replace devices that are often working perfectly well. The improvements may be incremental, but the marketing remains powerful because the product itself has become deeply personal. People don't simply use smartphones, they live through them. Phones manage communication, work, entertainment, navigation, banking, photography, shopping, and countless other parts of daily life. As a result, the device becomes intertwined with identity in a way few consumer products ever have. That emotional connection changes spending behavior. Instead of evaluating upgrades based purely on utility, many consumers evaluate them based on novelty, status, convenience, or the feeling of staying current. Financing options make this even easier because the purchase rarely feels like spending $1,000 or more. It feels like adding another monthly payment. And that's where the math starts becoming dangerous. Monthly payments create psychological distance between consumers and total costs. Small, recurring amounts feel manageable, which encourages decisions that might feel very different if the full price had to be paid immediately. The result is a culture where millions of people continuously finance upgrades while barely noticing how much money flows into technology over the course of a decade. What's interesting is that the practical benefits often diminish long before the spending stops. Older devices continue handling most everyday tasks perfectly well. Calls still work, messages still work, photos still look great, navigation still functions. Daily life continues without major disruption. Yet many consumers feel pressure to upgrade anyway because the behavior itself became normalized. That's the key theme showing up throughout this list. The middle class isn't necessarily buying things it doesn't need. It's buying things on schedules and expectations that were created during a different economic reality. And when affordability changes but habits don't, financial pressure eventually follows. Number 9. Big weddings. Weddings occupy a unique place in personal finance because they exist at the intersection of emotion, family expectations, social pressure, and spending. Very few people approach a wedding as a purely financial decision. They approach it as one of the most important moments of their lives. They want the day to feel meaningful, memorable, special. They want family and friends together. They want photographs they'll treasure for decades. All of that is completely understandable. The problem is that wedding costs have expanded dramatically over time, often far faster than people's ability to comfortably pay for them. What once might have been a celebration increasingly resembles a major financial project. Venues became more expensive, catering became more expensive, photography, entertainment, decorations, flowers, transportation, and countless other components all increased in price. In many cases, simply attaching the word wedding to a service seems to create an entirely different pricing structure. At the same time, expectations continued rising. Social media amplified this trend by exposing couples to endless examples of extravagant celebrations, beautiful venues, luxury details, cinematic photography, carefully curated experiences that make ordinary weddings seem inadequate by comparison. And comparison is where the financial danger often begins. People stop asking what kind of wedding genuinely reflects their priorities and start asking what kind of wedding feels socially acceptable. The event gradually becomes a performance rather than a celebration. That's when budgets start stretching, savings accounts start shrinking, credit cards start appearing, and financial compromises begin long before the marriage itself has even started. The difficult question many couples avoid is whether the experience they're creating is worth the financial trade-offs required to create it. Every dollar spent on a wedding is a dollar that cannot be used for a future home, emergency fund, investment account, or other long-term goal. That doesn't mean weddings should be cheap. It doesn't mean celebrations aren't important. It simply means every financial decision carries an opportunity cost. And in an era where affordability is becoming increasingly scarce, opportunity costs matter more than ever. What's particularly interesting is that many happily married couples look back years later and struggle to remember countless expensive details that felt critically important during the planning process. The marriage matters, the relationships matter, the memories matter. Many of the expensive extras don't. Yet those extras are often the first things people stretch their budgets to include. That's why weddings have quietly become one of the clearest examples of a broader trend. Middle-class households continue pursuing experiences based on expectations that were formed when the economics looked very different. The emotions remain the same, the prices don't. And that's a combination that can become surprisingly expensive. Number 10. Private childcare and premium kid spending. This is one of the most emotionally complicated categories on the entire list, because no parent wants to hear that they might be spending too much on their children. In fact, most parents would argue the exact opposite. If there's any area of life worth spending money on, surely it's your kids. Their education, their opportunities, their experiences, their future. And on some level, that's absolutely true. The problem is that modern parenting has become dramatically more expensive than many people realize. Not because parents are irresponsible, but because the expectations surrounding parenting have changed in ways that would have been difficult to imagine a generation ago. Childcare costs surged, private schools became more expensive, tutoring expanded into a massive industry. Youth sports evolved into highly organized and costly ecosystems. Summer camps, enrichment programs, specialized lessons, travel teams, and educational subscriptions all became increasingly common. Individually, each expense often feels justified. Parents aren't usually thinking, this is a luxury. They're thinking, this might help my child. And that's what makes the spending so powerful. When an expense is tied to your own comfort, it's easier to say no. When an expense is tied to your child's future, saying no can feel irresponsible. Many parents worry that declining an opportunity today might somehow limit their child's success tomorrow. That's an incredibly difficult emotional burden to carry. The challenge is that modern culture often reinforces these fears. Parents constantly encounter messages suggesting that successful children need more activities, more enrichment, more coaching, more experiences, and more advantages. Every family appears to be doing something. Every child appears to be enrolled in something. Every opportunity feels important. Over time, this creates a subtle arms race of expectations. Families begin spending not because they carefully evaluated the value of every activity, but because participation itself starts feeling mandatory. The baseline keeps moving upward. What's rarely discussed is the financial pressure this creates inside households. Many parents are making extraordinary sacrifices to fund opportunities for their children. They work longer hours, delay retirement contributions, reduce savings, carry additional financial stress. They convince themselves they'll figure it all out later because the spending feels too important to question. And yet, there is a difficult reality worth acknowledging. A child's future is influenced by many things. Stability matters, emotional support matters, healthy relationships matter, financial security at home matters. A household constantly struggling under financial pressure can create challenges that expensive activities don't necessarily solve. That doesn't mean parents should stop investing in their children. It means they should recognize that opportunity has become increasingly expensive, and that not every expensive opportunity automatically produces better outcomes. The middle class isn't just paying for childhood anymore. In many cases, it's paying for an ever-expanding definition of what successful childhood is supposed to look like, and that definition keeps getting more expensive. Number 11. Maintaining a luxury version of normal. This may be the most important category on the list because it doesn't describe a specific purchase, it describes a mindset. One of the biggest financial shifts over the last several decades is that many things once considered luxuries gradually became expectations. Not because people consciously chose extravagance, but because society slowly redefined what normal looks like. The process happens so gradually that it's almost impossible to notice while it's happening. A slightly larger home becomes normal. A newer car becomes normal. Premium technology becomes normal. Frequent dining out becomes normal. Subscription services become normal. Convenience becomes normal. And because these changes occur incrementally, nobody feels like they're dramatically upgrading their lifestyle. They're simply keeping up with what appears to be ordinary life. That's where lifestyle inflation becomes dangerous. Most people imagine lifestyle inflation as obvious excess. They picture someone buying yachts, luxury watches, or exotic sports cars. In reality, lifestyle inflation is often much more subtle. It's the accumulation of dozens of small upgrades that eventually become permanent expenses. Each individual upgrade feels reasonable. The problem is that income rarely creates financial freedom when every increase in income is immediately matched by higher spending expectations. This creates a frustrating cycle that many households know all too well. They earn more than they did 5 years ago, yet they don't feel wealthier. They receive raises, yet they don't feel financially secure. Their income grows, yet their stress remains surprisingly similar. Why? because expectations grew alongside income, and expectations are expensive. One of the most fascinating aspects of human psychology is how quickly people adapt to improvements. The new car becomes ordinary. The upgraded apartment becomes ordinary. The premium service becomes ordinary. What once felt exciting gradually fades into the background, while the associated costs remain permanently attached to your budget. That's why so many people feel trapped despite earning respectable incomes. They're not necessarily paying for luxuries, they're paying for a luxury version of what society now calls normal. And the difference between those two things is much smaller than most people realize. The truly uncomfortable realization is that many middle-class households aren't struggling because they failed financially. They're struggling because the cost of maintaining modern expectations increased faster than their ability to comfortably support them. That's a very different problem, and it's one that affects far more people than most statistics can capture. Number 12. Pretending old affordability still exists. This is the biggest one because it sits underneath everything else we've discussed. The real financial challenge facing much of the middle class isn't laziness, it isn't stupidity, it isn't a lack of discipline. In many cases, it's a simple failure to recognize how much the economic landscape has changed. People are still emotionally budgeting for a world that no longer exists. A world where housing consumed a smaller percentage of income. A world where groceries felt predictable. A world where family vacations didn't require months of financial recovery afterward. A world where college costs looked different, car prices looked different, insurance costs looked different, and a middle-class salary stretched much further than it does today. The problem is that expectations tend to change far more slowly than reality. People remember what life used to cost. They remember what their parents could afford. They remember what felt normal 10 or 15 years ago. Those memories quietly shape financial decisions even when the underlying economics have completely shifted. And that's where confusion starts appearing. Someone earns a decent income but still feels financially stressed. They work hard but struggle to get ahead. They do many of the things society tells them to do, and somehow feel like the results don't match the effort. Naturally, they assume the problem must be personal. Maybe they're making mistakes. Maybe they're failing somehow. Maybe everyone else has figured something out that they haven't. But often, the reality is much simpler. The rules changed, the economy changed, the math changed, and many people never fully updated their expectations to match the reality. That's why awareness matters so much. Not because awareness magically lowers prices, not because it solves inflation, not because it makes housing affordable again overnight, but because awareness allows people to make decisions based on reality instead of nostalgia. You can't solve modern financial challenges using assumptions from a different era. At some point, the old model stops working, and when that happens, the smartest response isn't denial, it's adaptation. That adaptation may mean buying a smaller house than you originally imagined. It may mean driving a car longer than society expects. It may mean taking fewer vacations, spending more intentionally, or caring less about appearances and more about long-term flexibility. None of those choices sound particularly exciting. In fact, many of them sound boring. But financial stability is often boring. Real wealth is frequently boring. The ability to sleep at night, handle emergencies, invest consistently, and avoid constant financial stress rarely looks impressive on social media. It doesn't generate attention, it doesn't create envy, but it creates something much more valuable: peace. And for many households, peace has quietly become one of the most underrated financial goals in modern life.
Because ultimately, the purpose of money isn't to impress people. It's to create options. It's to reduce stress. It's to increase freedom. And sometimes the fastest path toward those goals isn't earning dramatically more. Sometimes it's simply recognizing that what used to be affordable isn't affordable anymore, and adjusting accordingly. That's not failure, that's reality. And the people who adapt to reality the fastest are often the people who build the strongest financial futures.
If you've made it this far, I'm curious. What feels completely normal today that secretly became way too expensive? Let me know in the comments because I think the answers might surprise a lot of people. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. The economy keeps changing, the rules keep changing, and understanding how money actually works has never been more important. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.